Okay, good morning. So we're up to Siman Ration and Zayin Sif Ches. We're working through the halachas of Hatmana. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. So we're up to Sif Ches. So again, Hatmana means insulating food to maintain the heat, and we differentiate between two types of Hatmana. Hatmana b'dava Hashem moisif hevel, something which is it's on a source of heat which is going to increase the heat, and that's even also before Shabbos. The worry is that you might come to stoke, and like we said in the beginning, or even on Shabbos is a problem of doing Hatmana on davar she'ein moisif hevel. That's what we spoke about earlier in the week. Now, Sifches. Afal pi, shemuta lahashos kadeira al gabi kira sheyesh b'gecholim, al pi hadrachim shenisbar b'siman Rishon Gimel. Even though we allowed shehiyah was back in Rishon Gimel, where you can leave a pot which is not fully cooked. But we discussed the various ways in which shehiyah would be allowed. Imhu mechusa begadim, if you have covered over the pot with cloth, with clothes, even though the clothes are not being moisif hevel, they're just insulating, they're just maintaining the heat. If you've got pots on the stove, and therefore you've got a fire underneath the pot, moisif hevel, that is called doing hatmana on the davar which is moisif hevel. So imagine the contemporary situation. You've got a hot plate, or you've got a blech, and you've got pots on top of it, and you take a towel and you wrap it fully. That's considered hatmana on the davar which is moisif hevel, because you've got a source of heat underneath it, whether it's a hot plate, whether it's a blech, whatever it may be. Umiu kol shul be'inyan she'ein habegodim noigim b'gadera. But wherever the begodim which are insulating the pots are not touching the kadera, they're sort of just loosely hanging over the tops of the pots, but they're not sort of wrapping around the actual pots. Even though it may be on a davar which is moisif hevel, which is there's eish underneath it, and it's on something which is increasing the heat. Since you've not fully wrapped it, that's okay. Hilkach. Therefore, if you put a pot on top of a kira, on top of an oven, or the different types of ovens, where there are coals there, and the sides of the pot do not touch the gecholim, it's not fully covered, that's called shehiyah, and that would actually be okay so long as you fulfill the conditions in Reish Nun Gimel. Okay, let's see the Mishnah Berurah till there. Okay, Sif Kotzen Lamed Zayin. Kadeir al gabi kira. V'hainu shema'amida al gabi kira memalo. That means you put it on top of an oven. Al pia imagine the oven of old, and you've got a little opening at the top. Ve'ein shulei hakadeir noigin b'gecholim b'shalamato. But the sides of the pot are not touching the gecholim. V'uadin b'chei gavnim omedes al gabi kisei shel barzel b'toch kirshanu, or they're on some sort of tripod on a metal stand within the oven. In other words, the pot is not touching the source of the heat, the actual coals. V'gam tia kadeira mevushel kotzocha, and the kadeira is fully cooked. Lefi das mechabesham. You put ash on top of the gecholim, but right now it's still considered hot, and therefore it's moisif hevel, and therefore you're going to have a problem. I.e., even though you're allowed to do shehiyah with the conditions, so long as it's not touching, in other words, the begodim not touching it, it will be mutter. I'll summarize it in a second. Ve'ein shuli hakadeira, says the Mishnah Berurah Mem Aleph, hamachaba oz l'shitas b'siman Rishon Gimel seif sif Aleph. Avodas haramos sham ba'ago afilu shul hakadeira noigin b'gecholim gam ken shari kim shakadeira megula l'malo ve'ein toman b'begodim. So what emerges from this is an important halacha, that whilst we have spoken about Hatmana, that means you can't insulate a pot, the examples we gave, for example, that you open up the oven and you or the oven's gone off and you want to take it out and you want to wrap up the kigel or the chicken or whatever it is with a tea towel, with a cloth, that is a problem. But it's only a problem if it's fully insulated, if it's fully wrapped. And therefore, if we're looking at this excellent Shabbos kitchen by Simcha ben Cohen, in his summary of the halachas of Hatmana, he says this: the permissible methods of insulating, right? That's exactly what we're saying. The term insulating refers to enclosing a pot completely on top and on all sides. If a substantial portion of the pot is left uncovered, wrapping the remainder does not constitute insulating Hatmana and is permitted. Okay, that's the first permissible methods of insulating. If it's not fully covering the pot, but you're sort of just loosely putting the towel over it just to maintain a bit of warmth, but it's not totally insulating, that would be okay. And then the second one would be wrapping does not touch the pot. It is permissible to insulate a pot if a substantial part of the wrapping does not touch the surface of the pot. A loose wrapping is not considered insulating and therefore not covered by this prohibition. Okay, so that's quite useful to know. Accordingly, one may drape a towel over a pot or urn, allowing it to hang loosely even though the entire pot is covered, because it's not considered fully wrapped in the thing. Okay. Similarly, we'll come into this in a second, but similarly, a pot covered with a wide plate. Imagine you've got a pot and you put like a board on top of it and you hang something over it. So a pot covered with a wide plate may be wrapped in a towel, as the towel will not touch the entire pot, but will slope inwards from the plate to the base of the pot. It's not fully insulating it. So those are just useful, permissible ways of doing Hatmana on Shabbos. But it all comes from this halacha. Okay, let's carry on the Machaba. Ve'im, I'm 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the bottom. Ve'im nosen al hakadeira rochov. This is exactly what we just spoke about. If a person puts a board, she'enu noger b'tzidi hakadeira. So imagine you put a board on top of your pot. V'nosen begodim al osu kli rochov, and then you put some clothes or a towel or something on top of that board. Mutter. To kiven she'ena begodim nesunim ela al osu kli rochov she'enu noger b'tzidi hakadeira ein kan hatmana, because it's not fully insulating. It's not wrapped tightly around the entire pot. Let's just do the Mishnah Berurah on that. Mem beis rachov hu adin k'shenois na piagdera daf rachov. You put on the kadera a sort of wide board. Be'inin shabegodim shemachasem emala lo yigu b'tzidi hakadera. They won't touch the sides of the pot. That will actually be okay. If you look at 40, just by the way, he says, what exactly, how do you define this exactly? Okay, how do you, it's got to be recognizable that the towel is not totally wrapping the thing. It's got to be clear that it's loose from the visual perspective. And if you've got, and then if they look at the next paragraph in paragraph 40, imagine you've got a very full blech, imagine you've got like a sheet of metal over the gas stove, and you've got lots of pots there, or you've got a hot plate, something like that. She'ein laniach begodim shiatfu es kol hakaderes, she'af kol achas ma'akaderes eino etufa al yidei begodim ela mitzid achitzayin, v'atmona k'miksasim, mikol mokum yesh la'achshiv es kol hakaderes, k'kader achas v'nimtza shematmin es kol yachad mikol stodin. In other words, let's say you've got a hot plate, so you've got lots of things on the hot plate, and I've seen this sold actually, and I didn't really understand why people do this, but you take one big towel, it must be fire resistant, it can touch the hot plate, but you put this whole big towel over everything on the hot plate to keep it warm. So that, he says, is a problem, because even though it's not wrapping around every single pot on the kadera, but it looks like it's sort of covering, it's like considered one pot, and you're covering one entire pot, certainly on something which is mosif hevel, so you've got a problem with that. So what's the eitzah? Just partially expose it, just fold back, a bit of it. Okay, let's carry on. Mem Gimel, Ein Kan Hatmana. So if again, the Mechaba is talking about a case where you've got a board on top of your pot, and then you hang a towel over that. That's okay because it's not tightly insulated around the pot. Ein Kan Hatmana, says the Mishnah Berurah Mem Gimel, V'hinei, Kol Zeh Kashiyesh Eish Bakira. We're talking about where there's actual fire in the oven. Avlim Ein Eish Bakira Klal. If there's no fire in the oven, Yesh Oimrim She'ein Le'aser Lahamid Kadeira Leho. Then there's no problem. If there's no Eish there, then there's no problem of putting Kadeira and covering it with Begodim. True, you're putting on something which is still hot and it's Mosif Hevel, it's adding heat. You might stoke the ash and get some coals there, and that's a problem. There's no problem because you're in an oven, and an oven, in the actual main body of the oven, you're not concerned for all this. It's not the same as the gefes, where you've got all the coals there. The gefes The gefes inherently is adding heat from itself. But with a kira, the source is coming from a fire. And so long as there's no fire there, then it's cooling as you're progressively cooling, and therefore there's not a problem. Some are more machmir. Like we just described. And then you cover it with clothes to keep the warmth. Like the Mechaber described. You shouldn't protest against those who are mekel. So that's coffee. You put like a pot of coffee on top of an oven, and then you insulate it. Because you're really insulating on a dove which is moisef hevel. The best way to get around it is to put a board on top of that pot and then to hang the towel over that, so it's not fully insulating it. Because they do have what to rely on. If you put sand on the oven, even though it's not fully insulating it, why? We said in the thing in Sif Aleph, or earlier on, that chol, sand, is one of those items which is moisif hevel. And the gezerah is you might come to wrap it fully in it. That's the Chai Odom. Okay, let's just take a look at 41. He says, the Chazon Ish Kosav, she'ein lahoka machmas atam shechem akira niskar v'hoilech, ela ka'ofen shegarfa zekecholim. You can only rely on the oven cooling down if you've removed all the gecholim. Because true, the coals have been removed, but the heat of the fire is still there. You may be cotton because you've sort of taken away the actual, you put ash on it, but at the end of the day, the coals are still there, and therefore that's going to be a problem. Okay, let's go back to the Mechaber. V'chein mutam, 2 lines from the bottom, where it says Mem Dalet, says the Mechaber, V'chein mutzah lo niach ha'kadeira b'tanurim shelanu al yidei sheyitin b'soicha chaticha chaya. Now, what you can do is you put a raw piece of meat in the kadeira, v'hu shlotei ha'kadeira negas b'gecholim. So long as the kadeira is not touching the gecholim themselves, v'af ha'pisha mechasa, turning over, pi'atanu b'godim, kiven she'ein ha'begodim noigim b'kadeira, lav hatmana hi v'shari. So even though the begodim are not touching the kadeira themselves, that would be okay. So again, so what does he say? So if you put a raw piece of meat there, and so long as it's not touching the coals, because okay, let's see the Mishnah Mem Dalet, sorry. V'chein muta pirush ad hashtamayri in kira. Till now we're talking about a kira. You're allowed to put a kedera before Shabbos, even in an oven which is not garfakotim, because once you put a raw piece of meat in the pot, we're never worried about chitu anymore because it's going to take so long to cook. Even if it's mevusheles kotzorcha, also mishum shehiyah, because otherwise you're going to have a problem with shehiyah. V'chanal b'reish gimel sif aleph. Even though the kedera is fully in the oven, and you're covering the oven with clothes, so long as the begodim are not fully insulating the kedera, there's not a problem. So long as we said that the kedera is not negea but the gecholim. It's not negas with the gecholim. Says the Mishmur Memhei, the imhoy shuleh noigim begecholim, because if the base of the kedera were touching the gecholim, svirei lemechaber the machmal zeh gufa mikri matzmin bedova meisif hevel, also because otherwise that would be according to the mechaber matzmin bedova meisif hevel, which is of course also. V'harmosh sham bagos svirei dali deizeh lo chashiv hatmana ayin sham. Okay, let's just do the first bits of the Ramah. There won't be time for all of the Ramah, but let's just do the first bit. Says the Ramah, the Hatmana we do in our countries, this is the Ramah writing in Krakow in the 1500s, Shematzmina betanur, we put food in an oven, v'tochin al piatanu batit, we seal the oven, shari lekula alma, that will be fine according to everybody. Commission is by el b'simin reish dala, the by lekamon soif simin reish and test. Okay, let's do the mission on that. V'tochin memvov, v'tochin piatanu batit, we seal the oven. Regarding Hatmana you don't need to seal the oven. And at the bal loima, really what the Ramah is saying is the betiach shari b'chol inin. If the oven is sealed, then it's always going to be okay. Even if you haven't put the raw piece of meat, and it's the beginning of the bishul, the beloy tiach. If it was not sealed, then ordinarily you would have a problem that you might be machata, you might stoke the coals to make it burn quicker, to cook more quickly. But once the oven is sealed, you're going to be okay. V'da, the mavur le'el, the dafka b'basar, kashehu chai, ein b'chashash chitui. It's dafka raw meat that takes away the chashash. Because even if you stoke the coals, it's not going to help you because it's going to take a long time to cook this piece of meat. Avo pastida, but if you've got a meatloaf pastry with some content, or kidneys or some vegetables, a mini botsek, shalamarin is bashal, all those other types of things which cook more quickly. Even if you put them in quite close to Shabbos, and they're raw, because the concern is by stoking it will help. In the places where you're not knowing to seal the oven, also let's say minim elu betanu somach chashecha im lo nasim b'hem chaticha basal chai, because the only eight would be to put the raw meat. Elim kein yeshuhus sheisbashal kolponim b'aydiim k'maycha ben drusoi or shechasa gecholim be'efa k'may shechas v'simim rishkim. Therefore, the only eight would be to make sure it's MBD, it's maycha ben drusoi before Shabbos, or that you remove the gecholim. Good. Mem zayin shor lekula alma. If it's tuach batit, says the Mishmur Mem zayin. Va'af apichen yesh emrim the tzarich lizay shelo yatmin hakadera betanur b'teicha gecholim. You should make sure that you should not insulate, cover the pot with gecholim, with the coals from all sides. To kari hatmana b'dava meisiv hevel machmas hagecholim gufa, because that is your classic Hatmana b'dava ha-meisiv hevel. The gecholim themselves are meisiv hevel. V'yesh mekilin gam b'zeh, and there are those who make it even in this dal tuach batit v'los lechatoi, because at the end of the day, once the oven is sealed, there is no concern. V'chein mashma bar zorua v'tov lahachmin lechatchila v'gam mitamacheh, that even though it's tuach batit, if it's surrounded by coals, you should try and avoid that. For a different reason, because maybe by the morning the coals will still be kindling a little bit, there'll still be a light. It'll be also to the hatmin in gecholim themselves, even if the because we're worried you might come to touch the coals. Okay, so just to summarize, what have we said? That Hatmana is one of our bishul drabbanons, and Chazal were worried that if you insulate something, you might come to stoke and to be mechatza the gecholim. And therefore Chazal made a gezerah of not insulating something on a dover which is Mosif Hevel even before Shabbos. That means if it's on the stove or on the blech or on the hot plate, to fully wrap it up is a problem even before Shabbos. And on Shabbos, the problem is only on dover which is Ma'amid Hevel, which is just maintaining the heat. What we said importantly from today is that it's got to be fully wrapped. If it's not fully wrapped, you've got it's just loosely hanging over it, then that would be okay. So and then if you've got things on a hot plate, if you've got one covering on a hot plate, that's considered like one pot, and you've got a problem. So the eitz is just to expose the covering a little bit, and then you'd be okay. But Seder. Okay.